It's quite a nice day, quite a nice weekend. The weather around here has been really strange lately. Um, there have been storms and heavy rain in the rest of the country. Uh, it's been kind of cold here the last couple of days, and then we get another nice sort of autumn day. Just very unsettled weather. But I've got the MG out because I went out in it this morning. I'm actually going to have to do some work on that. It's due for its warrant, and those are due every 6 months, which is really annoying. Although apparently the Vintage Car Club have now actually managed to get that changed for classic cars or vintage cars, or at least club registered cars, which have to be over 30 years old. If you get what's called a VIC, which is a vehicle identity card, you can then go to 1 year warrants for these things. So I need to do that. I need to apply for the VIC for the MG, which I've never actually done before, even though it's perfectly eligible for it. And it's free. It's just a bit of a hassle going through the process, and you have to get photos and they have to be the exact right size, and apparently they're modernizing this process to make it easier, so we'll see how that goes. The VIC stuff is important because I'm kind of at the same stage as needing the VIC for the Riley, or I can get the first part of the VIC, which is called a DOMAS form, which is basically a form from the Vintage Car Club that identifies the car, and I need that document to prove to the people who register the cars that it is what I say it is, which is a bit funny because in this case it's a scratch-built historic replica, so we have to say what it replicates. So I'm trying to get that organised at the moment because there's enough of the car there now, all the running gear's there, the engine's there, everything like that is there, that I can actually start getting some of that documentation. And that needs me to get someone from the Vintage Car Club in to actually inspect the car. Back to the MG for a second. Like I say, it's due a warrant. Before I do that, I actually want to check out the rear springs. So this car has been lowered. It was originally a rubber bumper car. It's had slightly lowered springs put in it, but they're quite old now and they've sagged, and now it's a little bit too low in the rear. So I actually want to increase the height in the back, probably about an inch, because at the moment they've sagged so much that it actually bottoms out. And if you look at them, it's a bit hard to see from here, but they've actually gone, they're negatively arched now. So I need springs that are effectively flat when they're in the car. I think I can get some, but it means taking the springs off this so I can measure them and see what difference I need in the setting. The other thing is the last warrant he did pick me up on, I think it was evidence of oil on the rear brake, on the rear hubs. So I have to at least remove the evidence, I guess. The reason for that is because the rear seals leak on these. Or they don't really leak, they weep, I guess is a better word for it. I have replaced them on this before. I could have another go at replacing them, but it's hard to stop that happening completely. So I might have another look at them. I do make sure there's no oil getting into the brake drums, which there isn't, so that's not a problem. It just sort of collects on the bottom of the axle, so I need to clean all of that up, which I'll do when I look at replacing the springs. First I need to see if the springs are available in New Zealand. There's no point me doing all of that if I can't even get springs, because trying to import them is ridiculously expensive because they're heavy. Back to the Riley. So I've started looking at filling in the documentation. I need to talk to the local branch of the Vintage Car Club, which isn't actually my branch, but I've tried changing branches for, I think since I've been in Wellington, which is about 7 years, and it always seems too difficult, so I just haven't bothered. Don't think it matters. But it means I need to get the local branch to come and inspect it, and I need to get permission from my branch to say they're okay with that, which they will be. There's no reason why they wouldn't be. So I'm trying to organise all of that at the moment. Now, because it's a scratch-built replica, With a replica chassis, it means there's no chassis number to date it from. So what they do in that case is the dating now comes off the engine. And Riley engine numbers get interesting. So there's the engine number down there, 7060, which actually means this is a very early engine. Only it isn't, because it's a Bitzer engine. And Riley 9, they didn't really record the engine numbers, or if they did, all those numbers have been lost. So you don't really see engine numbers. All I can see is in the parts book, the second parts book, it does say engine numbers from a certain number. So 1934 to 1930 to 1934 are engine numbers such and such. And this is before that. So it's at least a pre-1930 engine cover. I believe it's about a 1928. The only other thing I can find that dates the engine is, we won't be able to see it on the phone, but stamped on the block there are numbers. So there's one stamped here, one in the middle, and one over this side, and I believe those are casting dates. And it's really hard to read, but the one up here says 30, so I'm assuming that's 1930. I can't remember what the middle one is. The one on the end says 9, so that could be 29, but the 2 has disappeared, so I'm pretty sure the 30 is the date. I have a couple of other blocks. One of them has numbers in the same place, and again, very hard to read because they're very small. They're only about 1/4 of an inch high. The other block actually has a casting date down there, which is different to this one. So I've basically built the car to 1930 spec as much as I can. That's what it's based around. That's what the body's around. That was the middle year of production for the Brooklands, which were made from, I think it was 28 to 32. Again, the records are very vague. They didn't really record engine numbers. Engines moved around from car to car. The covers can be moved around from car to car and engine to engine. So, you know, we're just going to have to go with that. It's basically 1930. The reason I did that is because I've got the parts book from that year, and I can show that all the parts on the car are just correct, you know, Riley period parts. So working through that process, you can see because it's covered in sawdust, I've been doing a bit more woodworking. So I am working out where all the brackets need to go still for the guards. I've pretty much figured out where they'll go. I've ordered about $500 worth of steel. So that's bits of tube, bits of angle iron to make some of the brackets more flat strap. There's some flat pieces that I'm going to use to make the diagonals that go behind here. There's some angle iron which will go across the chassis there, which gives you the support for the front of the seats. There's all sorts of bits and pieces on the way, hopefully this week. So that's all arriving. These are some of the other brackets I've made, and I've realized I'm going to need to modify or add to these. So for example, this bracket here goes in along here, but I need one of the tubes to mount the rear guards welded to it. So probably what I'll do for those is I'll make that little piece, that little bracket will be from angle iron. So I'll cut a piece of angle that goes over this and down so that I can screw it from the side and from the top. And I may make up a new bracket that goes across here and incorporate that into there. I'll know more when all the steel arrives. The next thing I've been doing is I've bolted the body down. It's actually sitting on the little rubber spaces now. So these are the little rubber washers, rubber grommets I've used, neoprene washers. So they are between the timber and the chassis, so there's a gap there now. There will be a layer of aluminium in there, so that'll go in there, but there's still a gap. Oops, if I can actually show it. So that gap is so that you don't get moisture trapped between the timber and the steel of the chassis rotting out the timber. It'll also provide a little bit of flexibility, but the reason you use ash is because it's flexible itself. So the whole thing twists. Everything on these cars moves around. I've also started working on the doors. This is the passenger door. This is actually my second attempt. I did a first sort of mock-up. I could have used pine for this, but I didn't have any other timber, so I was just going through reusing all the scraps of ash. And I sort of did this to give me some idea of how to put it together. These bottom joints are half lap joints. This top one is just going into end grain, screwing into end grain, which you're not really supposed to do, but it's easily strong enough. And you have to remember this whole thing is going to be covered in aluminium. It's going to be wrapped, so it'll be pretty strong. I'm using my original door to figure out where the timber goes, and the way the Riley doors work is it's wrapped around the top, all around there, and then the front edge, but the bottom edge and the back edge, you actually end up with a flat piece of steel that you screw to the timber, and it sticks down a little piece, and the aluminium is then wrapped around that. So it's a bit different to doors on other cars, and I think the reason for that is because it gets a bit tricky, and it's going to be interesting to see if I can actually get this right. But at the back of the door, the skin overlaps the body. So the door skin overlaps the body at the bottom, at the back, and along the bottom edge. But along the front and the top, it's sort of flush mounted. So that's been the biggest challenge with the door, is figuring out how much gap to put around the edges. And I'm really not sure, because you also need a gap at the front here for the hinges, and at the back for the door catch. So I've gone with 1/4 inch front and back and 3/8 top and bottom. And the way I came up with that is I'm going to be using 1.6mm aluminium. So you have to imagine there's a piece of aluminium on the top of the door, and then the body of the car comes around and wraps around, so you need space there. This is actually sitting on some 3/8 inch blocks I cut. So hopefully that's enough. I guess you want to err on the side of more gap than too little. And again, you have to remember everything flexes and everything moves, so the gaps are pretty big. So that's the door. So the next thing I need to do is make this curved piece that goes in the top there. And again, you have to notice that the driver's door and the passenger door aren't symmetrical. So I've started with the smaller one just to get the technique right. And you can see from this original door skin, the driver's door being longer had an extra wooden support in there. So that's where that's at. The back seat back, I can probably start cutting that out of the plywood now. Again, I haven't figured out exactly where the supports that hold that will go. They'll just be simple brackets or simple blocks that go on the back here just to stop it falling in. The reason I haven't done that yet is I want to work out the brackets for the guard stays. I want to try and keep those as symmetrical as possible, so that I don't have to do too many funny bends in the stays. So one is sort of here, center of the wheel, and I want these two equally spaced either side. The other thing I need to do is talk to my certifier guy about where I can mount the seatbelts, if it's going to be okay to mount the seatbelts to the cross member there, and exactly how we do that, because you have to remember this torque tube's going up and down, which is why you've got the cutout in the middle of the seat back there. I'm hoping it's easy enough to just sort of mount them on there, or else on some brackets that come off there, but I need his advice there on the best way to do that. That's going to be legal and get it past the inspection. Let's see, what else? Some of the steel I've ordered is to make the brackets for the headlamps. My phone just decided to stop recording for some random reason. So that's where I'm at with the car. I'm going to have to give it a wipe down again once I finish the woodwork to get all the sawdust off it. Let's see, what else have I been doing? The little KT250 is almost completely finished now. I got the bracket that goes between the forks. It's this one here. It actually has holes in it, so you could put a couple more screws through the guard, but I found I didn't need it. It's solid enough. And obviously I've mounted the front guard now, so that all works well. I have painted and clear coated the little engine side covers. They're in the back of the Land Rover waiting for the clear coat to dry. So that's the only thing that was left really, and then this is pretty much finished. What else have I been doing? I went to the tip the other week and got this neat little stereo. They've got a shop there, so you can get interesting things from the shop. I've been thinking about getting a little stereo radio for the shed for a while. This was $10, and it turns out to be reasonably modern because it's got Bluetooth and USB as well as CD and radio. Which is good because it means I can play stuff from my phone. I would show you that working. I'd play some of Randy's music for you. Risk the copyright infringement there, but it turns out I can't Bluetooth from my phone and film video at the same time. It doesn't let me do it. So we don't get to see that going, but it works pretty well. For $10, that was pretty good. I got a shredder, a paper shredder for $2, which is actually something I've been looking out for a while, because it's really handy to shred newspaper to go in the worm farm if it gets too wet. And the other thing I got was this sort of line trimmer for $5. It's a Makita one. It's not a very high-end model or anything, but it's a nice little two-stroke engine. It's actually got a little clutch in it, and that was $5. And I've been playing with it, trying to get it working. So it is missing the trimmer part on the end, but you can buy those new. And I have had it running, but it was running really badly. So I've ended up putting a new spark plug in it. That was $10. So I've already spent twice as much as I spent on the whole thing, as I paid for the whole thing. And again, I could get it running, but it just wouldn't run very well, or it would... it was hard to start, and then when it did run, if you tried to rev it up, it would just die. It would just cut out completely. So I've cleaned it all up as best I can, and I've taken the carburetor apart, and that wasn't too bad. The other problem with it was it was actually broken, so it had been dropped, and this is the backing plate with the choke, and this was all smashed up. So I've just repaired it with some JB Weld and a bit of super glue, and that works fine. That's all back together now. The carburetor though, the gaskets and things are a bit perished. So the rubber seems okay, but the plastic isn't too good. So I've ended up ordering a little rebuild kit for this. So I think that was another $20. So my $5 line trimmer has now cost me an extra $30. But I quite enjoy playing with these. They're quite fun to play with, and just learning how the little carbs work and rebuilding them. So the little rebuild kit's coming. It's a proper Walbro carb, or is it Walbro? I can't remember. So it's a decent make of carb. One thing that's really annoying is you have to set this little float valve thing. This is the little needle valve. The way it works is that's what lets the fuel in and out via this diaphragm that pushes down on it. So that kind of goes in there like that. And the diaphragm's driven from pulses from the engine, from the crankcase. So it's crankcase pressure, comes in this little port here, makes that go up and down, and that's what pumps the fuel. So this is a typical sort of needle and seat arrangement in there. So you have to set the height of this. And the older carbs, you could just look it up and they'd tell you what the measurement was. Now you have to buy their cheap tool which is just a little piece of brass that you use to set across there, which is cool. I mean, it's neat that they've got that and it makes it much simpler. But if I want to buy that tool, that's another $30. So I don't see why they can't just give me a measurement, you know, where you put a straight edge across there and you say that needle needs to be down, I think it's about a 1/16 of an inch. So this is a W, what was it? Can we see? A WYC carburetor, which I think is the same as a WYJ for this bit. These are all very similar. So if anyone knows what the height of that should be, I believe it's 1/16 down, about 1/16 down from the level of the top. That would be really handy to know. You'd think this would be easy to look up, but there are so many different carburetors and so many different variations. It's just hard to get a simple measurement, a simple specification. So I'm going to go back to working on the car. I've got my hot glue gun out so I can glue some cardboard together so I can make a template for that curved part on the top. One thing I have done with the doors, and this is what doing my little mock-up showed me. One, I decided it was better to put the screws in from the back, but the other thing it made me realize is you have to make everything quite oversized. The front and the rear, not so much, but these pieces need to be made oversized so you've got room to then go back and shape everything nicely. So I'll plane all of this down to get the right curve on the sides. That's why this is all oversized at the moment. This is oversized. So the new piece will go kind of down to here. I'm hoping there's not so much curve that I need to start gluing pieces together, but we'll see how that goes. I've been making the top rail for the door. I ended up having to glue two pieces together because this does have a slight curve to it and the timber's not thick enough to give me that curve. So I've cut out two pieces the same using my template there. That's going to be the exact same curve on the other side of the car. It's just that the door is longer. So the curve there is the same. It's just this section is longer on the driver's door. So I'm going to leave this clamped up overnight for those two pieces to dry. And then I will trace around these probably to make the parts for the second door. I didn't want to actually start, I've got the cardboard template, I guess I'll make another cardboard one, but I don't really want to start on the second door until I know I've done the first one and I've got it correct and got the technique correct, because then I'm just making another one on the other side. Pretty much the same, just mirror imaged and slightly longer. The other thing I've been doing just now is my horn button arrived. This is a reproduction horn button. I do have an original one actually, somewhere here, buried under piles of Riley bits. This was my original one. But you can see it's pretty broken. So it's not exactly the same, but it's pretty close. This would be really hard to repair because the sort of plastic has gone all brittle. And this one is a little bit different in how it works. The way the contacts work. So I'll keep that one. Maybe I will look at reproducing it one day. Maybe I can 3D print the parts, or ideally you'd do those in resin, not plastic, not the plastic I use anyway. So this is the little replica. It screws onto the boss here. I had to find the screws, suitable screws to go into it. I can't remember what thread they are. And it's very tight inside there to get the wires on. The wire I'm using, this is actually Teflon coated PTFE insulated wire. So nice and tough, the insulation. So it'll be good for running down the inside of the tube there. And I remember when I got this little socket set, wondering what I was going to use it for. It's perfect for things like this. So you can see the slot there is machined, so you can just get that in there to do the nuts on the end up properly. So I'd say that's paid for itself now. So I just need to feed this the rest of the way down, put the screws in from the back, and I can reassemble it all. I have the horn button in place. It looks pretty good. And the wires run down out to the end here, of course. And I've got some heat shrink tubing where it comes out the end of the tube. And what I'll do is make a little bracket somewhere to take a little tiny junction box. So might mount it off the end here somehow. I'll build a little box so that there's a couple of screw terminals and the wires just go into that. And then you won't see these red wires, it'll go into the normal loom. Those are just temporary at the moment. Aren't they, Milo? So I've got it temporarily hooked up. Let's see how it works. Yeah, I think that works pretty well. Obviously that's not the horn I'm going to use. I just happen to have that lying around for something else, so I thought I'd give it a try.